The sky darkened suddenly, and a low hum echoed across the colony. People froze in the streets as massive shapes descended from above. The Gorthon pack had arrived. Their ships, black and angular, hovered silently, casting long shadows over the human buildings. Soldiers scrambled, weapons raised, their hearts pounding. Everyone expected a battle, an attack that would bring destruction. But not Jalen Voss. Jalen was a mechanic. He had spent years fixing engines, repairing machines, and keeping the colony alive with his skills. He was small in size, wiry, and wore grease-stained overalls. While panic spread like fire, he walked calmly toward the landing zone. In his hands he carried a simple cardboard box. People stopped, mouths open in disbelief. "What is he doing?" one soldier whispered. "That's sandwiches," another muttered, incredulous. The Gorthons began to step out of their ships. They were enormous, taller than any human, with thick armor plating and claws that could tear through steel. Their eyes glowed faintly, scanning the humans below. They had a reputation that was known across the galaxy. Fierce, unstoppable, and merciless in battle. The colony had prepared for war, but Jalen walked forward, sandwiches in hand, without a hint of fear. Theric, the leader of the Gorthons, paused. His instincts screamed that this human was no ordinary prey. He tilted his massive head, curious but cautious. Why does he not run? Why does he not hide? Theric growled to himself, the sound deep and vibrating. The human kept coming, each step steady, almost fearless. Around Jalen, humans whispered anxiously. Could a single man really face these giants? Jalen set the box down on the dusty ground. He opened it carefully, revealing neatly stacked sandwiches, each wrapped with care. He knelt and gestured toward the Gorthons. His actions were deliberate. He did not speak their language, but his intent was clear. He offered food. Simple, humble, and human. Silence fell. The hum of the ships and the whispers of the crowd were the only sounds. One young Gorthon, Vectra, stepped forward. She was smaller than the others but still immense by human standards. She sniffed the air cautiously. "What is this?" she hissed to a nearby companion, her tone a mix of suspicion and curiosity. She inched closer to the sandwiches, claws scraping the ground. The humans held their breath. Soldiers raised their weapons, unsure whether to trust Jalen's plan. Jalen smiled faintly. He tapped a sandwich with one finger, showing it was harmless. Then he backed up a step, giving space. The movement was slow, careful, non-threatening. Theric studied him, eyes narrowing. There was something different about this human. Most would have fled or hidden. Most would have screamed or grabbed a weapon. But this human, he faced the Gorthons with nothing but food. Vectra finally reached out, picking up a sandwich. She sniffed it, her massive jaws twitching as if trying to understand the strange smell. A soft murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. Jalen nodded encouragingly, staying calm. Other Gorthons stepped closer, still cautious, still curious. Theric's eyes remained fixed on Jalen. He took a deep breath and motioned to the others. If these humans were brave enough to meet them without weapons, perhaps there was more to them than Theric expected. The first taste changed everything. Vectra's eyes widened. She chewed slowly, her expression unreadable to humans, but Jalen noticed the subtle relaxation in her stance. She looked back at Theric. He watched her, observing the effect carefully. Slowly, one by one, the Gorthons began sampling the sandwiches. Some sniffed first, others touched them, unsure if they were traps. Yet none attacked. None even threatened. It was the first sign that the balance of power might shift in ways nobody expected. Humans slowly relaxed. Soldiers lowered their weapons, still wary but hopeful. Civilians emerged from hiding, staring in awe as the humans and Gorthons regarded each other. Jalen did not speak, but his actions spoke louder than any words. He had faced the fiercest warriors of the galaxy armed only with something ordinary to humans, yet extraordinary in this moment, a simple act of peace. Theric finally stepped forward, towering over Jalen. He examined the human with sharp eyes, scanning his small frame for threats. Finding none, he reached down with a clawed hand, lightly touching a sandwich. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. The crowd gasped. The Gorthon leader was interacting with a human, not with weapons but with curiosity. Jalen smiled again, offering more sandwiches with a gentle nod. Time seemed to slow. The Gorthons, who had once struck fear across the galaxy, now hesitated. They looked at the humans differently, seeing not just prey or enemies, but creatures capable of thought, courage, and even unexpected cleverness. Jalen's quiet bravery and his sandwiches had done what armies could not. They had opened a door. By the time the sun began to set, the Gorthons had fully stepped onto the colony. There was no attack, no chaos. Instead, there was a cautious peace. Humans whispered among themselves, calling Jalen a hero, though he only shrugged and continued offering sandwiches. For the first time, the Gorthons moved with curiosity rather than aggression, watching, tasting, learning. Jalen looked up at Theric, who towered over him, and gave a small, confident nod. Theric returned it, slow and deliberate. The leader of the fiercest warriors had just recognized a human as worthy, not as an enemy but as something else entirely. A mechanic. A thinker. A quiet, clever being who had faced terror with calm courage and something as simple as sandwiches. The colony began to realize something incredible. Perhaps, with humans like Jalen, there was a chance for understanding even with the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. And perhaps this small, unusual man was about to change everything. The Gorthons stood silently around the box of sandwiches, their massive frames casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Jalen Voss stayed calm, kneeling a few steps away, his hands folded loosely on his knees. He didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't move suddenly. He only waited, letting the aliens' curiosity take over their fear and suspicion. Theric, the leader, studied the human closely. His glowing eyes scanned every detail, from Jalen's small hands to the careful way he had stacked the sandwiches. There was something about this human that made him different. Most humans screamed or ran at the sight of the Gorthons. This one, he faced them with nothing but food. Theric's instincts warred with his curiosity. Normally, curiosity did not stop a Gorthon from attacking. But this time something was different. Vectra, the young Gorthon warrior who had first tasted a sandwich, stepped forward again. She sniffed the air cautiously, her massive claws lightly scraping the ground. Slowly, she picked up a second sandwich, turning it over in her large hands. Jalen smiled faintly and gestured for her to examine it carefully. He wanted her to see that it was safe, that there was no trap. The simple gesture surprised the aliens. Normally, humans would panic or attack, but this one, he trusted them. Why does he not fear us? Vectra hissed to Theric. Her voice was low, almost a growl. Why does he not run? Does he not know what we are? He is strange, Theric replied, his voice deep and even. Perhaps, he is worth watching. The rest of the pack began to edge closer. They sniffed, studied, and prodded the sandwiches carefully. Their massive claws tapped the boxes lightly, as if testing for hidden dangers. Jalen observed them quietly, noticing each movement, each twitch of their jaws, each flick of their tails. He realized quickly that the Gorthons were intelligent creatures. Their reactions showed thought, not just instinct. They could learn and they could understand if approached the right way. Jalen reached into the box and picked up a sandwich with one hand. He held it high, above his head, and moved it slowly from side to side. It was a gesture, not of threat, but of invitation. Slowly, Vectra stepped forward again. She sniffed the sandwich carefully, then bit off a small piece. She chewed cautiously, her glowing eyes watching Jalen the entire time. When she swallowed, she looked at him and tilted her massive head slightly. It was almost a sign of approval. Theric watched, intrigued. He had never seen a human handle a Gorthon without fear. Usually they ran, hid, or attacked. But this one, he faced the pack with patience and calm. There was bravery in him, yes, but also cleverness. Theric motioned for two of his warriors to approach. They stepped forward, slow and deliberate, claws scraping the ground lightly. One reached for a sandwich, sniffed it, and then nibbled carefully. The other did the same, their massive jaws moving slowly, cautiously, tasting the strange human food. The human crowd watched in astonishment. Soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, unsure if they should intervene or continue observing. Civilians peeked from behind walls and corners, whispers spreading quickly. "He's feeding them?" one child asked. "Is he crazy?" Jalen ignored the murmurs. He continued offering sandwiches to each alien who approached. He noticed subtle patterns in their behavior. Some were curious first, then cautious. Others were aggressive, then softened after tasting the food. He realized that these aliens, for all their reputation as fierce warriors, were capable of learning and adapting. They could change if treated with care and respect. Vectra, who had already tasted a few sandwiches, stepped closer to Jalen. She sniffed the air around him, then nudged the box lightly with her snout. It was a silent gesture asking for more. Jalen smiled and handed her another sandwich. She took it carefully, chewing slowly. He noticed her stance relaxing, her shoulders lowering slightly. She was no longer on full alert. The human had begun to affect the Gorthon's behavior in a way that no one had thought possible. Theric studied the scene quietly. He was the strongest, the oldest, and the most feared of the pack. Yet even he could not ignore what was happening. Humans were usually weak, fragile, and cowardly. This one, he was neither. He did not fight, yet he did not cower. He had used food, a human custom, to calm warriors who had terrified entire planets. There was wisdom in this human. Perhaps there was more to humans than Theric had thought. Hours passed. The Gorthons moved slowly around the box of sandwiches, tasting, sniffing, and watching Jalen. Occasionally one of them would growl, but the growl was brief, as if testing boundaries. Jalen responded with calm gestures, never moving suddenly or showing fear. Slowly the pack began to trust him at least a little. The simple act of offering food had created a fragile bridge between humans and the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. The human soldiers and colonists began to understand that something remarkable was happening. Fear was giving way to curiosity. Suspicion was slowly turning into observation. Jalen had shown them that strength was not only measured in weapons and armor. Sometimes courage meant patience. Sometimes bravery meant offering something simple and human when others expected fear. By the end of the day, the Gorthons had tasted every sandwich in the box. Their massive jaws had chewed carefully, and their postures had softened. Vectra nudged Jalen gently, a sign of recognition. Theric stood a few paces behind, watching quietly, no longer menacing. The human crowd began to applaud softly, careful not to scare the aliens. Jalen simply smiled and stood, brushing his hands together. He had not spoken a word, yet he had communicated more than any speech could. In the quiet that followed, the colonists realized that something extraordinary had occurred. One human had faced the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy armed with nothing but sandwiches. Through patience, cleverness, and courage, he had begun to change the way the Gorthons saw humans. They were no longer just prey. They were beings who could think, act, and even teach in ways the aliens had never expected. Theric finally stepped forward and let out a low, approving growl. The Gorthons shifted their stance, still cautious but curious. For the first time, the pack felt intrigue rather than instinctive aggression. Jalen had earned their attention and perhaps the beginning of their respect. The simple act of food, something so ordinary to humans, had begun a remarkable change. As night fell, the Gorthons remained in the colony, moving carefully, observing quietly. Jalen returned to his workshop but kept an eye on them. He knew the test of curiosity was only the first step. There would be challenges ahead, but for now humans and Gorthons had found a small, fragile connection. It was the start of something new, something neither species could have predicted, and all because one human had dared to offer sandwiches instead of fear. Jalen Voss watched the Gorthons carefully. They were no longer standing like soldiers ready to attack. Instead they moved slowly, observing the humans and each other. Their massive claws scraped lightly against the ground, and their glowing eyes scanned everything. It was strange for the colonists to see the feared pack behave this way, but Jalen had expected it. He had seen the change start yesterday with a simple sandwich. Vectra, the young warrior who had first tried the food, approached him. Her movements were cautious but curious. She sniffed the air, then nudged a small wrench that lay on the ground near Jalen's workbench. The human smiled. He picked up the tool and held it out for her to see. It was simple, ordinary, but in this moment, it was also an offering. A sign that he wanted the Gorthons to understand humans just as they were trying to understand him. Jalen spent the morning showing them small things. How machines worked, how engines moved, and how humans fixed broken tools. The Gorthons watched silently, tilting their heads, sniffing, and occasionally touching things with large, careful claws. Their curiosity was growing. Theric, the leader, circled around the workbench, observing every detail, his glowing eyes flicking between the human and the machines. He seemed impressed, though he would never say it aloud. Vectra touched a small gear and then watched Jalen fit it into a larger machine. Her massive claw made a soft click as she tested the fit. Jalen nodded. "Good," he said simply. The word sounded strange to her, but the tone, calm and encouraging, made sense. Slowly she tried to repeat the action, learning from him. A faint rumble of satisfaction left her throat. It was the first sign that Gorthons could learn from humans, not just humans from Gorthons. The other warriors began to explore as well. One nudged a small cart, making it roll across the workshop floor. It startled him at first, but Jalen laughed softly, showing him that it was harmless. Then he guided the alien's claw to lift the cart gently, explaining through gestures how it worked. The Gorthons were patient learners, careful, but their intelligence became clear with each small success. They were not mindless killers as the humans had feared. They were disciplined, curious, and able to understand when someone approached them with respect. Theric stayed close to Jalen, watching the interactions quietly. He noticed the subtle gestures the human used, pointing, nodding, tilting his head, holding his hands open. Each small movement communicated intent without words. Theric was a warrior who had seen countless planets fall under fear and weapons. Yet he was learning something new here, something unexpected. Humans, small and seemingly weak, could communicate, teach, and even influence warriors through patience and cleverness. The day passed slowly. Jalen continued giving sandwiches between lessons, using them as a tool to maintain trust. The Gorthons began to respond not with suspicion but with interest. Vectra learned quickly, repeating tasks with surprising skill. Another warrior, Grun, touched a gear incorrectly and Jalen gently corrected him. His movements were careful, never forceful. The aliens seemed to understand that he meant no harm, only guidance. During a break, Jalen brought out a larger sandwich platter. The Gorthons paused, unsure what this gesture meant. He placed it down and stepped back, hands open, showing no threat. Slowly, Theric and Vectra approached and tasted the new food. They chewed carefully, observing Jalen as if asking silently, "Why do you offer this?" He smiled, showing that it was simply a human way of sharing, a sign of goodwill. Over time, even the other warriors joined in. The simple act of sharing food had become part of their learning, part of their understanding of humans. By evening, the colony had grown quiet around the workshop. Humans peeked from windows and doors, whispering among themselves. "They are learning from him?" one soldier asked. "Yes," another replied. "And they are listening." It was incredible. The Gorthons, once feared across the galaxy, were showing patience, curiosity, and respect. All because a small human had taken the time to teach, guide, and feed them. Theric approached Jalen near the edge of the workshop. The human looked up calmly, not afraid. Theric tilted his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. The leader of the pack had begun to respect him, though not in words. There was understanding in that tilt, a silent recognition that humans could be more than they appeared. Jalen nodded faintly, knowing that the trust was slow but genuine. Vectra stayed close, touching small tools, testing engines, and observing Jalen carefully. She had grown curious about humans, not in fear but in interest. She noticed the thoughtfulness in the human's actions, the patience in his gestures, and the courage in his calmness. Slowly, she realized that strength did not always come from power or claws. It could also come from intelligence, cleverness, and quiet determination. As night fell, the Gorthons gathered near the workshop. They were still cautious, still large and intimidating, but the tension from yesterday had faded. They watched Jalen work late into the evening, repairing a broken engine with deft hands. The humans who saw this understood that something extraordinary was happening. A single human, small and seemingly ordinary, had begun to teach the fiercest warriors patience, observation, and respect. The bonds were still fragile. The Gorthons were warriors after all, and their instincts were strong. Yet for the first time humans saw them differently. They were not just enemies, they were beings capable of thought, learning, and change. Jalen had bridged the gap, showing that humans could interact with even the most dangerous creatures intelligently. By the time Jalen finally stepped back from his workbench, Theric and Vectra had moved closer. The rest of the pack lingered nearby, silent but attentive. They had begun to understand humans in ways they had never imagined. And Jalen, with his simple actions, sandwiches, and patience, had become the first human to teach them this lesson. The colony looked on, amazed. Fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. Curiosity and cautious respect had replaced terror. The night was quiet, except for the faint hum of the workshop machines and the low rumble of the Gorthons breathing. Jalen cleaned his hands and looked around. He knew the next steps would be more challenging. There would be tests, misunderstandings, and perhaps danger. But for now he had done something remarkable. Humans and Gorthons had begun to understand each other. Small gestures, patience, and courage had built the start of a bridge between worlds. And in the quiet of that night, under the glow of the colony lights, humans and Gorthons alike realized that understanding could sometimes be stronger than fear, and that the smallest, calmest human could change the course of relationships with the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. The colony had grown quiet, the Gorthons and humans learning to coexist in cautious harmony. Jalen Voss continued working in his small workshop, repairing machines and offering sandwiches when the pack came to watch or learn. The humans had begun to trust the aliens, and the aliens were beginning to trust humans. But peace as always was fragile. A sudden alarm shattered the calm. Red lights flashed across the colony and warning sirens wailed. People ran into the streets, panic spreading like wildfire. From the sky, dark shapes descended, ships of a rival alien faction, the Dracarys, known for their ruthlessness. Their weapons glowed ominously, and their formation suggested a calculated attack. The colony was unprepared for such aggression. Soldiers scrambled, grabbing weapons, shouting orders, and trying to form defenses. Jalen stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands. He looked at the approaching ships calmly, assessing the situation. The Gorthons immediately tensed, claws scraping the ground and tails whipping in agitation. Their low growls filled the air. Theric's eyes glowed fiercely as he barked orders in his guttural language. The Gorthons moved into defensive positions, surrounding the humans instinctively. The pack was ready for combat, but something was different this time. They were not here to attack the humans, they were here to protect them. Everyone stay calm. Jalen shouted to the humans around him. His voice was steady, confident, carrying more authority than any weapon could. Follow my lead. Soldiers hesitated but then fell into his instructions, recognizing the strange effectiveness of his calm demeanor. Jalen ran to the workshop, gathering tools, spare parts, and mechanical components that could be used to set up barricades and traps. The first Dracarys ships opened fire, laser beams cutting through the air, slicing buildings and sending debris flying. Humans ducked, hearts pounding, but the Gorthons were ready. They leapt forward, their massive frames moving with terrifying speed. Theric swung his claws, tearing through enemy drones, while Vectra and the younger warriors knocked down smaller attackers with brute force. Jalen guided humans to reinforce walls and channel the enemy into narrow paths where they could be trapped. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Jalen had learned from watching the Gorthons that fear could paralyze, but strategy could win battles even against stronger foes. Using his knowledge of engines and machines, he rigged small vehicles to act as moving barricades and improvised shields. He showed humans how to use energy dampeners to redirect the Dracary lasers temporarily. It was unconventional, but it worked. Vectra charged alongside Jalen, protecting him while he adjusted machinery. She barked warnings whenever an enemy soldier slipped past the initial defenses. Jalen moved quickly, fitting parts, tightening bolts, and creating small but effective traps. The humans followed his instructions, moving in ways they never thought possible under attack. Slowly they began to feel a strange confidence, not because of weapons, but because of the guidance of one small human with quick thinking and courage. Theric roared, signaling the pack to advance. The Gorthons moved like living walls, protecting civilians and pushing back the Dracary. Jalen noticed that the rival aliens had not anticipated coordination between humans and Gorthons. Their attacks became disorganized as the humans learned to predict and exploit their movements. Jalen adjusted the barricades, directing lasers back toward the enemy. The Dracary were strong, but they were not used to facing combined intelligence and brute strength together. At one point, a Dracary soldier slipped past the barricades and charged toward a group of humans. Vectra intercepted him, her massive claws striking with precision. Jalen ran to a control panel, activating a small ramp he had built for quick defensive maneuvering. The ramp catapulted a barricade into the enemy soldier's path, stopping him just long enough for Vectra to finish the attack. Humans gasped, realizing that clever thinking, even from something as ordinary as a ramp or a moving piece of metal, could save lives in moments of danger. The battle raged for hours. The Gorthons, guided by their instincts and their new understanding of humans, protected the colony with precision. Jalen continued moving among the fighters, giving instructions, handing tools, and improvising defenses. His calm voice and clear directions became the center of the resistance. Humans who had feared aliens now worked alongside them, trusting the pack to protect them and trusting Jalen to guide them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Dracary forces began to retreat. Their ships rose into the sky, damaged and disorganized, forced to pull back by the unexpected efficiency of humans and Gorthons working together. The colony was battered but standing. Smoke rose from the wreckage and people slowly emerged from hiding, exhausted but alive. The Gorthons lowered their claws, breathing heavily, eyes flicking between the humans they had protected and the retreating enemies. Theric approached Jalen, massive shadow falling across the workshop entrance. The human looked up, breathing heavily but steady. Theric extended a claw in acknowledgement, a silent gesture of respect. Jalen nodded, understanding the significance. The fiercest warriors in the galaxy had recognized that humans, guided with intelligence and courage, could be trusted as allies. Not just as pawns, not as prey, but as equals in strategy and survival. Vectra came closer, nudging a piece of Jalen's toolkit toward him. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She had fought beside him, protected him, and now, in her own way, she was showing respect. Jalen smiled and handed her a small sandwich. She sniffed it cautiously, then ate, a quiet reward after the chaos. The other Gorthons followed, some tasting the food, some simply observing, still cautious but no longer aggressive. The humans slowly started to gather, helping each other clean up debris and tend to minor injuries. They looked at the Gorthons not with fear but with gratitude. The pack in turn watched quietly, their postures relaxed. For the first time, humans and Gorthons had faced a common enemy together. For the first time, the aliens had fought to protect humans instead of conquer them. Jalen surveyed the battlefield, breathing deeply. He realized that bravery was not always in fighting. Sometimes, it was in guiding others, staying calm under pressure, and thinking faster than the enemy. He had done that today, and the colony had survived because of it. The Gorthons, once feared as merciless warriors, had become allies. And that alliance, born of sandwiches, patience and clever thinking, had proven stronger than the most advanced weapons of the rival faction. As night fell, the colony slowly returned to normal. Fires were extinguished, wounded were cared for, and the Gorthons stood vigil at the edge of the settlement. Jalen returned to his workshop, tired but satisfied. The humans had learned something new about courage, and the Gorthons had learned something new about humans. Both species had discovered that understanding and teamwork could defeat even the most dangerous threats. And in the quiet after the battle, Jalen handed out sandwiches again, this time as a celebration. The humans smiled, the Gorthons sniffed and tasted, and a fragile, extraordinary bond between the species had been solidified, not by fear, not by weapons, but by courage, cleverness, and simple acts of care. The colony was quiet the next morning. Smoke from the battle had cleared, and the sun shone gently over broken walls and scattered debris. Humans were busy cleaning, repairing buildings, and tending to the injured. Jalen Voss walked slowly through the streets, carrying a fresh batch of sandwiches. He had learned long ago that small gestures could carry more power than weapons. Today he hoped they could help heal hearts as well as bellies. The Gorthons stood at the edge of the colony, watching. Theric, the leader, towered above them all, his armor slightly scratched from the previous day's battle. Vectra and the younger warriors moved with careful grace, still observing humans, still curious. Something had changed overnight. They were no longer outsiders, no longer enemies. The events of the previous day had built a new understanding between species. Jalen approached the Gorthons cautiously, holding the sandwiches in both hands. He knelt, placing the food on the ground in front of them. Vectra sniffed the offerings and then ate, her glowing eyes flicking toward him with a sense of acknowledgement. Theric stepped forward, large claws folded carefully, and took a sandwich in his massive hand. He bit into it slowly, watching Jalen the whole time. The gesture was deliberate. It was a recognition of trust, a quiet respect. Humans gathered nearby, cautiously approaching. They had seen the Gorthons fight to protect them, and now they saw them sitting peacefully, tasting sandwiches offered by the same human who had faced them without fear. Whispers spread quickly. "Did you see that? They're calm. They're eating with him? He really did it. He tamed them, not with weapons but with courage and care." The colony began to feel a strange relief, a sense that the impossible had become real. Jalen stood slowly, brushing grease from his hands. He looked around at the humans, then back at the Gorthons. "We can work together," he said simply, his voice steady. "We can protect each other. We can learn from each other." He did not shout. He did not demand obedience. His words were calm, filled with confidence. The Gorthons tilted their massive heads, understanding in their own way. They had fought alongside humans, observed their courage, and now tasted the gesture of peace offered by Jalen. Theric stepped closer, his heavy footfalls shaking the ground slightly. He lowered his head to meet Jalen's eyes. It was a gesture of recognition and trust. The leader of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy had acknowledged a human as more than prey, more than a weak species. Jalen nodded, understanding the significance. Around them, the colony watched silently, amazed at the rare scene unfolding. Vectra moved among the humans, curious about their activities. She sniffed at tools, watched engines being repaired, and occasionally touched a human's arm gently, as if learning from their actions. The other Gorthons followed, some cautious, some more daring. The bond between humans and aliens was fragile but growing stronger by the moment. Jalen continued moving among them, offering guidance and, of course, sandwiches. Each gesture strengthened trust, each smile built respect. Children, who had hidden in fear during the Dracarys attack, now came out of their homes. They approached the Gorthons cautiously at first, holding small toys and gifts. Vectra sniffed the air and nudged the offerings gently. Jalen encouraged them, showing the children that the aliens were friends, not monsters. The scene was quiet but powerful, humans and Gorthons interacting peacefully, learning about each other for the first time. By midday, the colony had cleaned the streets and repaired some of the broken machinery. The Gorthons had begun assisting in small ways, lifting heavy beams, moving debris, and observing human work. Their movements were careful, controlled, but they were participating. Humans marveled at the strength and skill of the aliens when combined with their willingness to cooperate. Jalen watched, smiling faintly, proud that something as simple as patience and sandwiches had led to this unprecedented cooperation. Theric called the pack together near the central square. He moved slowly, deliberately, showing authority without threat. Jalen followed, standing a few steps away, calm and ready. The leader of the Gorthons made gestures, communicating with the younger warriors, and then turned to the humans. Though the language was different, the meaning was clear. The pack would stay not as conquerors but as protectors and observers. The humans understood the significance. The fiercest warriors had chosen allegiance over dominance. Vectra approached Jalen and nudged a small container toward him. Inside were new sandwiches, made by the Gorthons using human ingredients. It was a gift, a gesture of mutual respect. Jalen smiled and nodded, accepting the offering. The children cheered quietly, sensing the peace that had been built. The colony had survived attacks, learned courage, and formed an unexpected alliance. All because one human had dared to face the pack with simple acts of care and intelligence. As evening fell, the humans and Gorthons sat together in the central square, eating and talking in gestures, sounds, and shared experiences. Laughter, soft but real, echoed in the streets. The Gorthons learned human customs, and the humans learned Gorthon ways. Trust, fragile but growing, replaced fear. The bonds formed through shared struggle, guidance, and food had proven stronger than any weapon. Jalen looked around at the scene, breathing deeply. Soldiers, civilians, children, and Gorthons were together in harmony. He realized that courage came in many forms. In fighting, in guiding, and in choosing to understand others. The pack that had once inspired fear now inspired hope. One human, armed only with patience, intelligence, and sandwiches, had changed the destiny of an entire colony. The night grew calm. Stars sparkled above, reflected in the soft metallic armor of the Gorthons and the weary but smiling faces of the humans. Jalen handed out the last sandwiches, a symbol of peace and friendship. Theric accepted one, eating slowly, and Vectra followed. The humans watched silently, understanding that this was more than a meal, it was a bond that could not easily be broken. By the time the colony finally went to rest, a quiet understanding had settled over it. Humans and Gorthons had faced danger together, learned from each other, and built trust where there had been only fear. Jalen returned to his workshop, exhausted but satisfied. He knew the future held challenges, but he also knew that cooperation, courage, and simple acts of care could change the course of even the most dangerous situations. In the quiet of that night, under the glow of the colony lights, humans and Gorthons alike understood something extraordinary. Fear could be transformed into respect, aggression into friendship, and strangers into allies. And it had all begun with one small human, a few sandwiches, and the courage to face the fiercest warriors in the galaxy without fear. The bond between species had been forged, and it would last. The colony had survived. The Gorthons had found respect for humans, and the humans had found allies in the most unlikely of places. Jalen smiled, knowing that the future, though uncertain, had never seemed brighter. Peace, understanding, and friendship had been won, not by weapons but by courage, patience, and something as simple as sharing food.